back here. Welcome back to my podcast. Today I'm going to be telling you about a book series that I completed in my summer holidays. Percy Jackson. Percy Jackson was written by the author Rick Riordan. And Rick Riordan is also responsible for many other book series which are related to Percy Jackson, like The Heroes of Olympus, The Trials of Apollo, and The Kane Chronicles, and many, many more. Today I'm going to be telling you about the first book of the Percy Jackson series, which was Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. And Percy Jackson was a half boy, half god and all hero. That's weird, right? But remember, this book is just fiction. Anyway, let's get started. But wait, before I get started, I need to give you guys a warning. So, you know Percy was a half-blood, right? You're probably listening to this because you might be one. But Percy's advice is to turn off this podcast right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Because being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. But if you're a normal kid who's listening to this because you think it's fiction, great. Continue listening. But if you recognize yourself in any of these stories about Percy, if you feel something stirring inside, stop listening immediately. You might be one of them. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they'll know it too. And they'll come for you. Well, don't say I didn't warn you. So, Percy was a 12-year-old who would live in upstate New York with his mother until he attended Yancey Academy, which was a school for troubled kids. But was he a troubled kid? Well, yeah, you could say that. Percy was actually kicked out of a lot of schools before Yancey. I would say, I'm pretty sure about 6 schools before Yancey. He was kicked out, expelled, and all out of 6 schools. I mean, I haven't been kicked out of even one school. Percy, you've got a weird life ahead of you and behind you. Anyways, so Percy was he didn't really know he was a half-blood until a little bit later. But right now, Percy was just a normal kid who was enjoying, or maybe not enjoying because, he's been under a lot of pressure in his schools. He was just a normal kid living his life, his terrible life, I mean. So, Percy was actually really good at swimming, and his best friend Grover said that he should try out for the Guinness World Record because he could hold his breath underwater for a really long time, about 10 minutes. And I'm pretty sure with my knowledge that the world record of the Guinness World Records for holding your breath underwater is 2 to 3 minutes. And 10 minutes would definitely shatter that world record. But Percy would always be like, hey, I'm a troubled kid studying at Yancey Academy who's been expelled out of 6 schools. Who would ever accept me for a Guinness World Record? Grover would always get kind of mad at Percy since he wouldn't listen to his advice. And Grover actually was a scrawny-haired boy, and he had an injury on his leg, which is why he needed crutches. So, Percy's by far favorite class was Latin class, and they were having a field trip. But the problem was Percy didn't really want to go on this field trip because the reason he's been expelled from so many schools was kind of because of field trip. Once he was expelled because they went to a battlefield and he was using some weapon or something and accidentally blew up the school bus. Well, yeah. And another time when he was in 4th grade, then they took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool. That would be exciting, but not for Percy. And Percy sort of hit the wrong level on the catwalk, and his class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, you get the idea, right? The reason he's been kicked out of or expelled of many schools was, well, the problem started with a field trip. And Percy knew that this field trip wasn't going to be good either. So Percy kind of wanted to skip the field trip, but he had to go. And, well, a girl named Nancy Bobofet was a freckle-headed girl who kept hitting Grover at the back of his head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Ew, who has ketchup on their sandwich? I mean, I personally love ketchup on anything, but never on peanut butter sandwich. Ugh, what would that even be called? PB&Ks? Anyways, so Percy hated field trips. And, well, he would always try to stand up to Nancy Bobofet, but he was scared that he would get in trouble. And Percy, after now you know about him, definitely wasn't a boy who would want to get in trouble. So then, on the field trip on the bus, Nancy Bobofet was hitting Grover again with those disgusting PB and peanut butter and ketchup sandwiches. But and Percy was about to explode, but Grover was calming him down, saying, I love peanut butter sandwiches. But with ketchup, Grover. So, once they reached the museum where they were taking a field trip to, it was to learn about the gods, the Titan gods, which you may know as the Greek gods. And there's some you might actually know, who are Poseidon, Athena, Hermes, Zeus, and them all. And this actually really far back relates and front relates to Percy's history about being a half-blood. So being a half-blood is kind of related to these gods and everything. Half boy, half god, all hero. That's another clue for you guys. Oh, and by the way, Percy isn't a god, just in case you're wondering. So, Percy actually liked his Latin teacher, who was Mr. Brunner. He was a very kind person who would sit on a wheelchair because of an injury on his leg. Or was it? And Grover would always, relate to Mr. Brunner. He would talk with Mr. Brunner a lot about the injuries on legs. Percy didn't really know why, Mr. Brunner and Grover had so much relationship and all, which you will get to know about later on. And Grover would always be on Percy's side, and Mr. Brunner would never blame Percy like Percy's awful new pre-algebra teacher, Mrs. Dodds. Mrs. Dodds was a teacher who would always take Nancy's side. So imagine this scenario. Percy just sitting on a bench in the basketball court, and then Nancy comes and stamps on his foot. Then, wouldn't Percy complain to a teacher? Now let's say Mrs. Dodds was the closest teacher there was. So he asked Mrs. Dodds if he would help, and then Mrs. Dodds would just completely flame up and she would be like, Percy, why did you step on Nancy's shoes? They're so dirty now. I mean, what teacher does that? Then Percy would never ever like Mrs. Dodds. He would hate her. And Mrs. Dodds had the same thing with Percy. She would never ever like Percy, and she would hate him. So, when every field trip happens, there's a teacher who is leading the field trip, which in this case was Mr. Brunner, and there's a teacher who would help take care of the children, which in this case was the pre-math algebra teacher, which was Mrs. Dodds. Well, at least there was a trip to a museum about the Greek gods. So then Mr. Brunner asked a lot of questions to Percy and everything, which will be useful later on, but I don't really want to go into detail in those questions, so I'll just give you the questions and answers. So one of these questions was, who was the great Titan who ate his 3 demigod sons, and who were those sons? Not demigod sons, god sons. Not like that type of god sons, the sons who are gods, okay? So the answer was the Titan was Kronos, and he ate up his 3 children who were Poseidon, Zeus, and Hermes. No, not Hermes, Hades. Poseidon was the god of the sea. Zeus was the god of the sky. Not the god of the sky. The god of the sky. And Hades was the god of death. So that was Percy's answer. And he would have to lay back because these things are in his test. And for some reason, Mr. Bruner didn't ask the other kids these type of questions. Well, he did ask questions, but they weren't like learning questions. They were like, are you having fun? And literally, yeah, of course they were having fun. Percy's the only one who's being asked the questions. And many people, except apart from Percy and Grover, would think that the Latin teacher, Mr. Bruner, was boring. I mean, his quizzes, his pop quizzes, his tests, bored them out so much. Nancy Bowerfit would pretend to fall asleep. Anyways, now some drama comes in, which got Percy into trouble. So, Nancy was just talking with her friends, and Mr. Bruner showed something very amazing. I don't know what it was. And then everyone had to back up a little because the light on it was so bright. So everyone backed up, and Percy accidentally hit Nancy because she wasn't paying attention. She didn't know we had to back up or anything. So then he hit Percy, and then Percy hit Nancy, and Nancy just dramatically falls and starts pretending that Percy pushed her. And Mrs. Dodds is like, Percy, Nancy, what's wrong? And even Nancy's friends are saying like, Percy just pushed Nancy and she got terribly hurt. And Nancy was like, yeah. Then Percy was like, what? I didn't do anything. I was just moving back. Like everyone was. But apparently Nancy was too busy talking with her friends that she didn't pay attention. Then, of course, Percy shouldn't have said that. But don't worry, he didn't get expelled yet. Then Mrs. Dodds was like, Percy, what is the problem with you? Nancy, are you okay? Then the lights suddenly went out. Luckily, Mr. Bruner had that thing in his hand which was showing a lot of light, but he had to put it down, and he asked everyone to get out of the museum until the lights came back on again. So everyone was sitting outside, and then while everyone was sitting outside, Mrs. Dodds asked Percy, Percy, can I talk with you for a moment? Then Percy was like, yeah, sure. And Bruner, Grover was like, wait, I'll come too. And then Mrs. Dodds was like, you will stay here. I need to talk with Percy privately. So Percy and Mrs. Dodds went to a storage room. You know, like the storage rooms, they have these places where they store things. Those were completely empty and they were big enough for a person to stand on. And you'll see why I needed to tell you that in a while. So Percy was pushed inside first, and he was like, yeah, I'm sorry about pushing Nancy, and I know you can give me detention, or even better, you can get me expelled. I don't care. I just want to meet my mother again, because Percy hadn't met his mother in a really long time. So then Mrs. Dodds, when he turned around, Mrs. Dodds was gone, and he was like, is this a joke? He was about to leave because he thought Mrs. Dodds had just pushed him in and then ran away. So he was about to leave, but the door automatically closed, and then he looked around for Mrs. Dodds. Then Mrs. Dodds was like standing on one of those places where there was no storage, and she was like, where is it? Where is the master lightning bolt? Give it to me. And Mrs. Dodds wasn't Mrs. Dodds anymore. She was this freaking bat-winged, crazy, hairy, I don't know, bat? Well, she was actually a fury. And she was about to attack Percy. Percy scrambled. It means he fell down backwards. And then Mr. Bruno's voice came from nowhere. And he was like, Percy! He clicked a pen and threw it at Percy. And then while the pen was in the air, it just turned into a bronze sword, and Percy caught it, and without even thinking, he slayed his pre-algebra teacher. That's all that happened. Then, when people die, they just lay flat on the ground. But actually, when monsters die, like what Percy did just now, he killed a monster. When Mrs. Dodds, the Fury, was dying, she didn't exactly just fall down. She vaporized. And I'm pretty sure you know what vaporized means. She just vanished, and the rest of her body became into golden shimmering dust. Then Grover came in, and Mr. Bruner was not there anymore. And then Grover was like, Percy, are you okay? What happened? Was something wrong? And then Percy was like, nah, I'm okay. He lied, of course, because he just killed a Fury with a sword which was supposed to be a pen. You get the idea if you were Percy, right? Then Grover helped Percy up, and he was like, hey, anyways, the lights are back on in the museum. Let's go. And once they were back from the museum, I'm not going to tell you everything that happened in the museum because, it wasn't that important. Then once they were back at Nancy, Percy was excused to go home by Mr. Bruner, and Percy said that he wanted to bring Grover with him. Then while they were going, Percy was like, actually, I lied to you. I was not okay. Mrs. Dodds, she called me in, and then she just became this weird bat-winged thing. And then Grover was like, wait, Mrs. Dodds was a Fury? Then Percy was like, wait, what's a Fury? Explain you later. We have to get you home right now, and maybe even to camp. Then Percy was like, whoa, slow down, Grover. What are you talking about? Then Grover said that he was Percy's protector. And Percy was like, no offense, Grover, but you have crutches. And Grover was like, what's the problem with having crutches? The strongest karate players have crutches. I mean, maybe that's not true, but I don't know. But Grover had to say something to make Percy believe that he was more than a crutched guy who was, Grover was really shy, and he was not so defensive. He couldn't protect himself very well. And he didn't want Percy to get in trouble either. He couldn't protect himself. But this whole year at Nancy, he was just protecting Percy. So then Percy was like, you can't be my protector. And I mean, why do you even need to protect me? Am I in danger or something? Then Grover was like, yes, you're in danger. You saw that Fury? She was trying to kill you. Then Percy was like, well, yeah, sure. I know that he was trying to kill me. He, she, whatever. But what was she talking about? Where is it? The Master Lightning Bolt? What's that? Then Grover was just ignoring while he got some tickets for the bus. And Percy and Grover then turned around, and they saw a stall which wasn't there anymore before. And there were like 3 old ladies there, and they had a sock, and they just cut the rest of the wood with ginormous scissors. And then Percy was like, what was that? Does that mean I'm in danger? Then Grover was like, oh no, run Percy, run! Then Grover and Percy ran and waited at the bus stop. They got on the bus as quick as they could, and they told the bus driver that they wanted to go to upstate New York. So they reached upstate New York. They had to walk a little to Percy's house, and Grover kept explaining about that. And then lastly, Percy asked, what's the relationship you have with Miss Chiron? Is it something about you being my protector? And actually, Grover was a protector because Percy was a half-blood. But Grover didn't want him to know that, because in the warning, if you know that you're a half-blood, it will just take less and less time for the monsters, which are they, to sense you. And Mrs. Dodge was one of those monsters who sensed Percy. Because, well, he was learning about the Titans and all, which were his backstory of, front story. So then Mrs. Dodge knew, this is a half-blood. He must be the one who carries the Master Lightning Bolt. And you understand why this Master Lightning Bolt is so famous a little, or maybe a lot later. So Percy and Grover jumped on the bus and they got home. And right before ringing his house's doorbell, Percy told Grover, now remember, my mother's name is Sally Jackson and she's the kindest person you will ever meet on earth. Then he rang the doorbell and Gabe opened it, and Gabe was Percy's stepfather, and he was the worst stepfather you will ever get, or Percy would ever get. And Percy would nickname him Smelly Gabe because, well, he was really smelly and he would every day play poker with his dumb friends. Then when Percy entered the house, Gabe was like, have you got $20 on you? And that is not a way to greet your stepson when he enters the house after a long time. Percy just stamped $20 on the table and asked, where's Mom? And he said, upstairs in the kitchen. Over there in the kitchen. Percy ran to the kitchen and he saw his mother, Sally, and her eyes lit up with happiness. She hugged Percy and she was like, oh, you never told me you're coming. Percy, are you okay? How's your year at Nancy? Don't tell me you got expelled. And who's this friend? And before Percy could answer all of her questions, she was like, wait, answer them later. How about you go up to your room and here, take these yummy blue waffles with you. Then Percy went upstairs with the blue waffles and ate them up. He really loved his mother's blue food, and trust me, it tastes delicious. Well, I've never tasted it, but blue waffles, how would that taste? It just sounds amazing. And if Percy liked it, I don't know why we shouldn't like it either. So Percy gobbled up the blue waffles because, as I said, he loved them. And he sat down and talked with Grover a little. Then after a while, before dinner, Percy's mother came and said, meet you for dinner in 5 minutes. Oh, and also, she sat down on the bed next to Percy and she said, tomorrow we're going to go in Gabe's car to Montauk Beach. And Percy was so excited. He was jumping in his head though. His mother left the room and once again repeated 5 minutes for dinner. Then Percy was really excited to go to Montauk because it was like his childhood, Montauk. And he always loved going to the beach and splashing in the waves, building sandcastles. Maybe he was a little bit old to build sandcastles now because, he's 12 now. So, building sandcastles isn't exactly what a 12-year-old would do. Anyways, Percy was super excited to go to Montauk, and the next day he was getting ready and Grover was coming too. But of course Gabe wasn't coming because why would he want to come to Montauk? But it was his car. Anyways, his mother was driving, of course, and Percy and Grover sat in the back seat. Then of course, going to Montauk, they would need a lot of swimming suits. Grover had a giant bag which is full of his shorts because he did not like to get wet, but Percy dared him to go in the water for at least a while so that he could teach him surfing. And he assured him that in surfing, if you're good at it, and don't fall in the water, you just have to stand on a board. Then you won't even get wet. And for some reason, Grover had these really, really thick leggings which would absorb the water so that the water wouldn't touch your skin. And in real life, that is not a thing. Because no matter what you wear, no matter how thick it is, you're gonna get wet. So Percy, Grover and his mother, not Grover's mother, Percy's mother, set off to Montauk. So they slept one night there, and then the next day, Percy, his mother asked Percy, so was something wrong? I mean, why did you have to come home? And Percy didn't want to tell about Mrs. Dodds because he thought that his mother would freak out and they would have to leave Montauk. Then he said, nothing. I just felt a little homesick, so I wanted to come back home. And Grover was just setting up the tent, and he heard that, and he was like, homesick? You aren't feeling homesick? Mr. Dodds attacked a fury attacked Percy, Sally, and then he had to evacuate, but he isn't really expelled because Mr. Bruner didn't say that. He just gave him a leave to come home for a while, and that's what happened. And then a fury is sensing him, and it knows that he's a half-blood, and then there was complete silence. Sally was like, half-blood? They know Percy's a half-blood? Percy, why didn't you tell me this before? Then Miss Sally put everyone in the car and they set off. Then Percy was like, where are we going? Another boarding school? Let me guess. What about that school where I was expelled from in 3rd grade? Then her mother was like, no, there's no time for that now. We're going to have to go to a camp. A camp, Percy said? A camp that your father was thinking to send you at. But I couldn't have you so far away from me. But now that's the only option left. Then Grover was like, Camp Half-Blood. Percy was like, I'm one of those freaking half-bloods, aren't I? Then again Percy said, wait, Grover, are you a half-blood? Then Grover took off his long baggy shorts that he would always wear. And when Percy saw what was under those shorts, he was like, goat! Because Percy is not a big fan of goat. And Grover isn't exactly a goat, he's a satyr. So, yeah. And Percy was like, so that's why you wear those shorts all the time. And wait, so you don't really need crutches? Then Grover was like, nah, but with these goat legs, it's hard to walk without them. But I don't need them and I can show them. Those shorts just tickle, so they make me buckle a lot. Then they arrived at the camp and Percy's mother said, go past that tree and you will be safe. Percy said, I'm not leaving you. But you must. How have you been leaving me all of those times at the boarding school? Percy said, but I knew I would come back to you one day. After this, I might never see you again. Then Percy's mother said, go, now. And a dark figure was coming towards the car. And Percy pulled his mother out of the car and all three of them ran, including Grover. Then, while they were running, Sally said, right when it comes close to you, jump at the right time. It won't catch you then. Then Percy and Grover were like, okay then. And Grover tripped over a rock and the monster, which was a Mintor, was coming, like it was a bull, a giant bull. And it was head first about to hit Percy, and Percy, like his mother said, jumped at the last second, and his mother was taking care of Grover since she tripped. And standing up for goats isn't that easy once they trip, or especially satyrs. Then the Minotaur started raging towards Sally. Sally ran a little back so that the Minotaur would get away from Grover, and then she was about to jump at the last second, but the Minotaur had learned his lesson. his hands were out and they caught Sally and picked her up. Then Percy was like, no! And the Minotaur wrapped his hands around Percy's mother's neck and Percy helped Grover up and, oh no, the Minotaur closed his hands around Percy's mother's neck, Sally's neck, and started squeezing, and poof! Just like how the Mrs. Dodds had died, Percy's mother just vanished, just like that. No! Percy shouted, and right before his mother died, she choked out the word, go! Percy and Grover ran and vanished Sally. And there went Percy's mother. He was in tears. I mean, firstly, he didn't even know who his dad was, and now his mother's gone. Percy was like, I'm an orphan. Well, I'll continue the next part later on, and I'll tell you all about Percy's journey at Camp Half-Blood. But bye for now. Stay tuned.